Hello and welcome to, or back to Victimology. Today we're going to be discussing the content of Chapter 4 of the textbook, Victims of Interpersonal Crimes, Violence, and Theft. These are person crimes, basically, although we're going to be talking a little bit about burglary. Most of what we're going to be talking about today is murder and rape or sexual assault and aggravated assault and robbery and burglary. But before we get that, I want to discuss the discussions. You guys did a really good job with the discussions, I think. Some of you didn't. Okay. Make sure that you read the instructions and address all parts of the question. Also, you need to respond to at least 2 people and reply to anybody that responds to you. The online learning system that we have is set up to create or to build a virtual discussion, because we can't have it in the classroom because this isn't a in-person class, it's a virtual class, therefore we need virtual discussions. It doesn't need to be as mean or tacky as Facebook or Twitter, but you do need to respond to at least 2 of your classmates and reply to anybody that responds to you so that we can continue this discussion. You should still have access to the discussions. If you're not real happy with your grade that you received, you can address it and fix it. So let's start with some definitions in our topic for this week. First, I want to turn on my chat room in case anybody shows up to the live session. You can type your questions or comments in the chat session. If you're watching this asymmetrically, you can make your comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching me on Facebook. Not Facebook, but YouTube. If you're watching me on YouTube, like and subscribe. You can make your comments down below. If you're watching me within Canvas, you can make your comments below. I think that you have the ability to push the like button as well or something like that. But anyway, incident rates, and victimology again. We're talking about discussions and about definitions. Victimology is the study of victims and the plight that they go through, not only as a victim of the crime, but also as part of the as it goes through the criminal justice system, law enforcement, the investigators, the DA's office, the investigators for the DA, the victim services representatives throughout the entire program, and then moving on into corrections, probation, parole, or prison, wherever the offender goes. The victim still has this plight that they go through. I know one of my students in my death penalty class is writing a paper on the effects of the families caused by the death penalty. And I think that's an absolutely amazing topic. I think that it's something that should be researched and should be conducted. I like the idea and I like that topic. Okay, but incident rates. Incident rates is measured or is defined as the measure of the number of new victims per 1,000 or per 100,000 persons annually to reveal the risks people face. Okay. The data that we use, the data that we find within the Uniform Crime Report and the NCVS, the National Crime Victimization Survey, is after the fact. This gives us information about crimes and criminality after it happens. So using that data, we can create what's called a trend analysis. It provides answers by graphing changes over time. Okay, and if you go through the textbook, there are several charts that show the crime rates and the trends of the crime rates. And for the most part, all crime since the 1990s has been steadily going down. Why is that? I don't know. well, we'll get to it later in the semester. You also are given through these charts and through the data is what's called prevalence rates. Prevalence rates estimate the proportion of people per 1,000 or 100,000 who have ever experienced some form of misfortune, whether it's murder or rape or assault or aggravated assault or burglary or robbery or arson. The prevalence rate gives you an idea of how severe the crime and criminality is in your local area. You could go to citydata.com and it gives you prevalence rates. It gives you an average from one community to the next community on the prevalence and the amount of crime that's in any given neighborhood. Citydata.com can actually break that information down to the neighborhood that you live in, not just the city. Cumulative risks. Cumulative risks estimate lifetime likelihoods by projecting current situations and current data that we have. And it takes that data and we can project into the future if you are ever going to have that particular problem or instance. Okay, differential risks indicate the odds of an unwanted event being perpetrated against you or against an individual based on demographic characteristics such as age, race, gender. And we can, using data, we can identify who is at greatest risk for this particular crime or criminality or this particular event. Which groups sustain the greatest casualties within any given event. And we're going to be going through a lot of the index crimes, and we're going to be talking about the statistics and what groups of people or types of people face greater harm or risk of greater harm or a lesser threat of harm. We search for these patterns, or an attempt to search for these patterns, we look for regularities. We look for commonalities. This is a lot to do, even though we're in numbers research and we're in quantitative research, this is something that we do within qualitative research as well, is we look for common trends. We look for common activities. We look for information that will predict future criminality or future victimhood. Okay, so in order to bring a greater focus, we focus during, eras. We look at eras. Right now we are in what's called the Globalization Era, or the era of globalization. It's important to remember that victimization rates vary from area to area. Victimization rates for the entire population indicate how frequently murder, rape, robberies, assaults are committed against average Americans, and how often in the typical household. In our world of postmodernism, can somebody define what a typical household is? I know when I was growing up, it was a nuclear family. It was a mother, a father, 2.5 kids, and a dog. Cats are not welcome here. That was the typical average American household. But we don't have that anymore, do we? Now we've got a lot of single moms. We've got a lot of single dads. We've got same-sex marriage. We've got same-sex couples raising children. We've got 6 kids, 4 kids, 12 kids, 11 kids, no kids. So defining your terms is always important. And using vague terms like typical become extremely hard. So you want to use attributes that are in common with each other, that we can turn around and we can identify specific characteristics and not just focus on what we deem as typical. Because again, what's typical? Can you define typical? If you can define typical, define it below. And I bet you other people are going to disagree with you, because typical is not, it's one of those vague words that doesn't mean a whole lot, that we've covered before. So we want to look at things such as age and race and gender. We want to look at geographical characteristics. Do you live in urban areas, which is the inner city, or in the city? Do you live in suburban areas? Do you live in rural areas? And we can take these things and these characteristics and we can make predictions. We can tell you about the past and we can make predictions about the future based upon these. Females, for example, females are much more likely to be sexually violated than males. Almost 4 to 1. You know, for every one male that has been violated, sexually abused, we find that females are 4 times as likely to be sexually assaulted. But again, age has something to do with that. And I find that interesting. I shared a video, I think it was in my profiling class and not this class. I'll find that video, see if I can find that video, and I'll load it up in Canvas so that you can watch it. But we find, the statistics show, that males under the age of 18 are more likely to become victims of pedophilia than girls or females. Interesting paradox that we find there. But for the most part, females are much more likely to be sexually assaulted than males. Searching for these patterns means that you looking for the regularities within a seemingly chaotic mass of information, and then finding the predictability, because you need to filter your results. You know, it's like going to Google. You can do a Google search for John Fisher, and you're going to get 97 million hits. Most of them are going to deal with St. John Fisher, and then you're going to have St. John Fisher University. There's the John Fisher Institute of Criminal Justice, which I applied to work there because I thought that would be really cool for John Fisher to be working at the John Fisher Institute for Criminal Justice. I forgot to turn my phone on silent. I do apologize. All right. So anyway, I'm sorry, the phone just blew me away and got me all backwards. Guys, so people, you know, we use these characteristics so that we can deconstruct, or break down victimization rates into their little component pieces. There's 97 million hits for John Fisher. Now, if you turn around and you put John Fisher, Texas, you're going to get a lot fewer. You're filtering that information. And then if you go one more step and you put John Fisher, Odessa, Texas, then you're going to come down with a few more. Or Dr. John Fisher, Odessa, Texas, you're going to get even fewer. If you put Dr. John Fisher, Odessa, Texas, University of Texas, Permian Basin, you're going to get them up with me. Okay, so in our world of Google, there is so much information available. You have to, and the same thing with the Uniform Crime Report and with the National Crime Victimization Survey. There is so much information there that you have to break it down and you have to filter it into numbers that are understandable and translatable so that you can publish your findings and you can do some actual research that is helpful. Okay, so part of victimology is searching for these patterns, and that means looking for the regularities. Like I said, making international comparisons are extremely difficult and brings about hasty conclusions and hasty analysis, which end up being misleading. Some governments don't routinely disclose reliable information. Thus, some of their information is not reliable. It's not up to date, um, especially when we're dealing with crime rates, because some countries depend on tourism. And if the crime rates are showing, an increase in crime, then people are not going to want to go there. I'm sorry, I just had a brain dump. But people are not, if your crime rates are really high and really current, people are not going to want to go there. So a lot of governments are not going to keep that information accurate. They're not going to keep it current. It's going to be a few years ago. Even the Uniform Crime Report is running 18 months behind. We're not going to know the crime rates of 2021 until late 2022 or even 2023. This book, the textbook that we're using, has a published date of 2020, but all of the data and all of the information that is in the textbook is coming from 2016. That's 5 years ago. That's almost 6 years ago. The data is starting to get a little old, but it's the data that was in the textbook, so it's the data that I'm going to be using. You can go to the Uniform Crime Report at the FBI.gov. I think let's go find out real quick. Okay, the Uniform Crime Report is at fbi.gov/services/CJIS/UCR. Again, fbi.gov/services/CJIS/UCR. And then you can, I can share this. Okay. And then here at the Uniform Crime Report, you can say, here's the National Incident-Based Reporting System. We've talked about that. We are moving into this in 2021. We're supposed to be going to that instead of the Uniform Crime Report itself. You can explore hate crime statistics, and then the hate crime statistics go on through here. And it defines these particular things. Here's the annual reports, okay? And they go all the way back to 1996 and as early as 2019. Okay, so the 2019 hate crime statistics and everything's here. So let's back up a little bit. UCR releases are available on the Data Explorer. Okay, so we want to go to the Crime Data Explorer. Which state? We can just go to Texas. Okay, so looking at this chart, the rate of violent crime offenses by population. The red here is the national averages. The national incidents for crime. 2014 was a good year. But look at Texas. Although going back to 2009, our violent crimes were 491. In 2019, our violent crimes was 418. So Texas is a dangerous place, according to the data. And that's all violent crime. We can break it down. Let's just do past 10 years. Offender age. This is the age of the offenders. This is the age of the victim. And we'll get into this in a little more detail. Rape victim demographics, location type, 21,000 people. The vast majority of the people raped in this country or in the state of Texas were raped in their home. Parking lots, hotel, motels, alleys, streets, sidewalks, unknown. The relationship to the offender, most 8,600 in 2019 were acquaintances or date rape or known rapists, known. You know, the lowest number is strangers. I know somebody had said that the other day that most crime is stranger crime. This information right here by itself is telling you that it's not. But we'll get into more of this as we proceed. So, the high rates of crime can harm the public image, like I was saying. The differences in record keeping can also skew comparisons. And we're still talking at an international level, comparing the United States to Mexico, or the United States to Israel, or the United States to Myanmar, which used to be known as Bali. You know, if autopsies are not routinely performed on every body, then some deaths that are that were actually murders can be attributed to accidents or suicides. I was going to show you some pictures of some crime scene footage from Big Spring of an investigation that took place where it was ruled as a suicide. This man was sitting in the driver's seat of an El Camino. There was a bullet wound from a shotgun that entered underneath the jaw and blew out the back of his skull. The shotgun was found buried over 60 feet away. And this crime was categorized and classified. This death was classified as a suicide. I'll let that sink in for a minute. You should have one question on your mind, and that is, if the shotgun got buried 60 feet away, how was this a suicide? I'll tell you how. A family member found him dead in the car and knew that there was a suicide clause on his life insurance, that if he took his own life, the insurance company wouldn't pay. So they took the gun and they buried it over there. So now if the gun's not there, it can't be a suicide. But hey, that's the way they explained it. Their explanation fit the facts, and that's how it was. Japan has a very low body count in particular. Their low body count has been questioned because a lot of the crimes, a lot of the bodies in Japan have come back as they're classified as harikari or suicide. What I know about the Yakuza It's probably not really suicide. Studies show that the countries with the highest murder rates are found in Central and South America, south of the US border, especially El Salvador, Honduras, Venezuela, Belize, Guatemala, Colombia, and Brazil, Panama, and Mexico. These countries and then show extremely high rates of murder. And you can break down the evidence, and you're going to find out that a lot of these murders and a lot of these deaths are linked to the drug trade. There are oppressively high levels of violence in the islands of the Caribbean. Okay. But everybody wants to go to the islands. Everybody wants to go to the Caribbean as a way, for vacation, because you get all the ganja you want. They got all the new beaches, the sex on the beach. That's a drink, not an activity. But yes, it's also an activity. The most dangerous area in the Caribbean that's actually controlled by the United States is the U.S. Virgin Islands. The U.S. Virgin Islands is a very dangerous place. They have some of the highest kill rates. Another form of killing that boosts the body count that are not street crime and are not necessarily counted as murders per se is expressed as vigilantism, the death squads, terrorism, insurrection, the drug trafficking cartels, civil wars, the cartel wars, the gang wars. They're categorized differently, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. If I have the time. There's an average of 440,000 murders per year in the United States, which is about 6 murders per 100,000 inhabitants. So if you're looking at that 6 in 100,000, that's about, I don't know, the same chances of winning 5 numbers on the lotto. How often does that really happen? Okay, 3/4 of all victims are males. 3/4 of all murder victims in this country are male. 1/3 of the murder victims are killed by gunfire. Okay, so if we have 440,000 murders, only 1/3 of those are done by gunfire. The rest are done by some other means. We've got this humongous gun control debate on murder, on guns being used to kill people. But as an overall statistic, less than 1/3 of all the murders that occur in this country are a gun is used or gunfire is used. 2/3 of the United States, Latin America, Caribbean deaths, when you add them all together, we get to 2/3, so 66% of all deaths, not just murder, but all deaths, are caused by gunfire. Now, this is going to include your insurrection and your drug cartels and your gang violence and whatnot. In the 1980s, murder rate studies showed higher rates tended to be linked with greater inequalities. So what we found was that the higher the murder rate, the poorer the people, or the poorer the country, the poorer the community. The United States is one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, but we still have a pretty high murder rate. And people like to turn around and say that's because of guns. And I'm going to get to some more of those statistics here in a little bit that support that. But we have using statistics. Well, let me back up a second. Sir Robert Peel created and he established the first professional police force in 1829. Prior to 1829, there was the hue and cry system. There was a community watch system. where everybody in the community was responsible for policing the community and protecting the community. Well, as you would know, the rich people don't want to work their patrols. They don't want to do what they're supposed to do to take care. So they hire somebody to do it. And then now all of a sudden we've got a professional police force. And this professional police force, Sir Robert Peel created 9 principles of policing. And I'm not going to get into all those 9 principles of policing. We'll save that for your policing classes. But one of the things that he said, one of the things that he stated that applies to us in victimology is that you measure the success of a law enforcement agency not by their response times, not by their solve rate, the amount of crimes that they solve, not by how quickly they can get to a location or an incident. You measure the success of the law enforcement by the absence of crime. Yes, the way that you measure a successful, effective police department is through the absence of crime. So with that in mind, we're going to proceed and we're going to move forward. Juarez, Mexico, that's just across the river from El Paso. And this is just an oddity in itself. In Juarez, Mexico, in 2010, there were 3,000 murders. It was a 10-fold increase in 3 years. Okay. And that was the same time that we started putting up that wall, that horrible, evil wall between Mexico, Juarez, Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. That wall was actually commissioned and it was charged and it was ordered to be built by President Bill Clinton. Well, in 2001, Governor George Bush he leaves Texas, he becomes the president of the United States, and they start building this wall in El Paso and in Brownsville. The most dangerous city in the world is Juarez, Mexico. They're averaging 3,000 murders a year. El Paso, just across the river, since the building of the wall, is now the safest city in the United States. It's not one of the safest cities in the world, but it is one of the safest cities in the United States. So this would attest to the idea that walls work, because you have the most dangerous city in the world right next to one of the safest cities in this country. And there's not a whole lot of spillover. Some people are going to say it's the way that the city is run. But others will tell you that it's because of the wall and the violence from Juarez isn't bleeding over into El Paso anymore. But that's for another debate. That's for another discussion. The Medellin in Medellin, Colombia, there are 375 murders per 100,000 people. When the cocaine destroyed the city in 1981. Yeah. By 2016, that rate has dropped to a rate of 20 per 100,000. Now, those who lose their lives tend to be permanent residents. And that's another stat that we found, that tourists are not normally victims of murder. They'll get murdered when they get home. And we've been hearing a lot about that, until this Afghanistan fiasco. But a lot of veterans would go serve in Iraq, or they'd serve in Afghanistan for 20 years. We're still in Iraq, but for 20 years we were in Afghanistan. And veterans and soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen would go serve in Afghanistan. Then they'd come home and they'd get killed here at home. And people would say, how is that so? They were in a war field, they were in a battlefield. Now, 2 years ago, one of the victims of smegma breath here in Odessa was killed over by the university's football field. He had just got back from a year in Afghanistan. And people are always saying, how is this possible? He was in a war zone. He was in Afghanistan. He was fighting the terrorists, and he lived through that just to come back to Odessa, Texas, and get shot by a madman. Well, that's statistically significant, and that's proven through the statistics. You're more like a permanent resident is more likely to be killed or murdered in the streets of their hometown than a tourist is who's coming here to visit. And murder in the United States, we find that the highest rates of murder that's been recorded is in the South. You know, in the Confederate States, they have a 6.5 or 6.5 people per 100,000 overall regionally. The lowest rate per region is up in New England in the Northeast, where it's 3.5 per 100,000. So why the difference? Why are there half as many murders in the Northeast as there is in the South? I contend it's got a lot to do with the temperature. Because the people up in the north, up in New England, come November, it's cold. Nobody goes wandering around. They don't go hanging out. They go to the store to buy what they want, and then they go back to the house where the heat is, and that's where they stay. Down here in the South, it's warm all the time, so we're out. We're hanging out. We're doing things that put us in places where it's risky. The rates in the West is 4.0 per 100,000. In the Midwest is 5.7. We also find with murder that the proximity to the major cities. Residents in the inner city are generally face a higher risk of murder. Some of these cities are really dangerous places. We hear about the shootouts and the gang war happening in Chicago. And I've got, in Chicago, 5 police districts, which is 8% of the population, has over a third of the murders. In St. Louis is the most dangerous city in the country. They have 60 murders per 100,000 people. But nearly half of all those murders, all those slayings, take place in just 8 of the 79 neighborhoods and communities of St. Louis. I went to high school. I lived in a small little town. I lived on Scott Air Force Base, but I went to high school in Mascoutah, Illinois. And it was a farming community outside of East St. Louis. And East St. Louis is a dangerous place, But me and my friends would go into East St. Louis, and we wouldn't have any issues. We wouldn't have any problems. But only 8 of the 79 neighborhoods in St. Louis is where most of these murders take place. I'm going to say statistically it was 48% of all murders occur within these 8 neighborhoods. New Orleans is known as the meanest city in America and has the meanest streets in America. In 2007, they had 95 murders per 100,000 people, which dwarfs St. Louis. By 2016, that rate had dropped to just 44 per 100,000 people. So it's not as mean in New Orleans as it used to be, but it's still one of the meanest cities in the town. If you look at that picture right there, I don't know how well you can see it, but that picture that's the Bourbon Street Cafe taken on Bourbon Street in New Orleans on December 8th, 2020. There were more homeless people wandering the streets of New Orleans that day than there were tourists. Bourbon Street last year, Bourbon Street in the French Quarter was closed Monday through Thursday. There are so few places that were open. They only opened on the weekends because it was a way to control COVID. COVID didn't know that it wasn't allowed to infect people on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It only infected people in the French Quarter Monday through Thursday, so they closed the French Quarter. Okay, so contributing factors to murder include population density, the local economy. Are people close together? Are there tenement housing? Are they nothing but a whole bunch of apartments and apartment buildings right next to each other? Is there no place for people to get away from everybody else? I went shopping yesterday. I went to Sam's, and then I went to HEB, and then I went to the Lowe's supermarket, and there were so many people. You could not walk down an aisle without bumping into people. There are just people everywhere. I so miss COVID days when people were afraid to get out of their house because they might contract a cold. Excuse me, I'm sorry, this might be going on YouTube, so we can't say that. People were afraid of dying of COVID, so they didn't go to the stores. They didn't, they didn't frequent, this weekend football games, sold out stadiums, 80,000 people chanting and screaming and yelling and dancing and doing all the things. When you are in a community like this, you're more likely to commit murder. You're going to lose your patience. You're going to lose your brain, your mind, and you're going to kill somebody. They found that high poverty, high unemployment, low wages, and a high wealth gap is also going to increase murder rates. Special problems such as gangs, the gang problem, the drug problem, human trafficking problems, ineffective police strategies. Okay. If I contend that if you have St. Louis, Missouri, or Chicago, Illinois, or New Orleans, Louisiana, and Detroit, Michigan, if you have a lot of murder going on in these cities, you've got poor police strategies. And your policing system needs to be changed. What did Sir Robert Peel say? Sir Robert Peel said the success of a police department is the absence of criminality. If we've got a whole lot of murder going on, the cops aren't doing something right. And we need to figure something else out. Okay. So, traditions and customs, subcultures condone violence, and Texas has been getting a lot of flack here of late because we have the concealed carry laws, and we can conceal carry in the state of Texas. And we're told that Texas has this culture of violence. And the culture of violence will increase murder. And now everybody's carrying a gun. I'm expecting, or listening to the narrative, I'm expecting to walk down the street and just see gunfights happening. People pulling their guns and killing each other. I don't know. Demographic factors, family instabilities, divorce rates, Okay, so if you have a single parent household, you have a high divorce rate, you have very poor, you have young males without a strong male model, role model in the house, and other marginalized minorities, you're going to find higher rates of murder. So we're going to go back into these cities. We're going to go back into New Orleans and St. Louis. We're going to go into Detroit and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. Okay? And do we find family instability? Do we find single parent households? Now, the statistics show and tell us that if you are a young male, a young man from a minority group raised by a single mom, you are more likely to A, become a victim of murder, and B, become a perpetrator of murder. Okay, so the UCR and the National Crime Victimization Surveys, the UCR does cover deaths, and they do cover deaths, but they don't answer a lot of questions about them. The guidelines for the UCR is that you complete the supplemental homicide report. This is a voluntary report done by police systems and medical examiners, but a lot of cops just can't be bothered to do so. Geographical patterns create profiles or statistical portraits of the victims and their offenders. So another source is used. Well, you use the supplementary homicide, and then there's the National Violent Death Reporting System. The National Violent Death Reporting System is managed by the CDC. So I don't know how much you want to trust the CDC after the fiasco called COVID, but they're the ones that track death. Okay? And a couple of weeks ago, the director of the CDC said that she was going to readdress guns and gun violence because it is a pandemic. Well, she has that data. That information is gathered and it's kept and it's stored by the Centers for Disease Control, because apparently lead poisoning is a disease that can be controlled. Okay, so information that you can learn through the medical examiner's office or through the National Violent Death Reporting System includes the birthplace and date, the ancestry, the family heritage, the ethnicity, the education level of the deceased, the cause of death of the deceased, and if there was any substance being used or abused at the time of death, such as drugs, alcohol, paint fumes, or whatever. These documents can answer the what the victim was doing when they were killed. We have found that through these studies, we have found that in 2014, 60 innocent bystanders and 20 good Samaritans were killed because of their actions or inaction during an event. 3,900 slayings in 2014 in which the circumstances were known. And with those circumstances, we can make predictions. 73% or 75% of all people that were killed by bullet wounds in 2016. In 1993, that rate was at 60%. So we're moving on up in the world. 73%, from 60% to 73%. Okay, knives were responsible for killing 12% of the murders inside the United States, and 50% was everything else. 56% of the offenders were known by the victim. Of those 56%, 25% were family members. And only 20%, okay, so it's 56 plus 25, that's 70, that's 81. Okay, so 56% were killed by acquaintances, 25% killed by family members, and 20% killed by strangers. Again, we're showing statistics that are suggesting or showing that it's not strangers that commit the most crime. Of the 7,000 deaths that were looked at, 6 were engaged in prostitution at the time of death, 12 rapes, 12 deaths were during a rape, none by strangers, all by acquaintances or family members. 108 were romantic triangles, where 2 guys or 2 girls were, 3 people were involved in this love triangle, and 2 of them were fighting over dominance and killed the other. 188 were gang violence. This is the highest rate since the 1980s. There are more people being killed in the United States week in and week out right now than there was during the crack wars when I was growing up in the 1980s. That was the pin on my chair. Scared the bejesus out of me. All right, so 604 deaths were from juvenile street gangs. Guys, these shootings, these killings, these drive-bys that we're seeing in Detroit, Chicago, and East St. Louis, and even New Orleans, they're gang units that are doing all of this killing. 585 deaths were also related to robberies. 25% of all cases were solved, and offenders were convicted. That's a horrible success rate, isn't it? 75% of the people that commit murder get away with murder. That's just murder. That's just wrong. However, let's think about this rationally. We have a rate of 5.3 per 100,000 people, meaning that a little over 5 people per 100,000 people are killed every year in the United States. That's a horrible number, isn't it? But let's look at it positively. 99,995 people survive every single year. 99,995 of 100,000 people survive every year. That's the way to look at it. Okay, we find that sex or gender, age, and race are the most important factors looking into murder. 75% of boys and men are killed. It's been this since the 1960s. 9 out of 10 victims that have been slayed are known by the offender that killed them. Most murder is male on male. Okay, again, 9 out of 10 offenders are also male. So most crime is male on male. It's intra-gender. When women do kill, they tend to kill their children and the men in their lives. According to the Uniform Crime Report, 75% of the victims are men, 25% of the victims are women. Studies would suggest that if you were non-binary or another of the 79 genders, you're safe because they don't die. Okay, race, 52%, just over a half of all victims are black, 44% are white. The remaining 3% are mostly Asian. Hispanics, 17% of the death of the slayings are Hispanic, but they are included in the white and they're scheduled in the white or the black. They're black Hispanic or white Hispanic. 91% of all black victims are killed by blacks. So it's black on black crime. 83% of all white victims are killed by whites, meaning it's a white on white crime. It is intra-racial. So when you sit there and you look at, and you try to tell me that because 52% of the victims of murder are black, that our country is somehow racist, you're not telling the whole story, because the rest of the story is that 91% of those people being killed, those black people being killed, are being killed by blacks. 87% of the white people being killed are being killed by whites. Children between the ages of 9 and 12 are the least likely to be slain. The risk rises as you go through your age, as you from 12 up to 24, your likelihood of being murdered increases until 20 to 24, where that's your peak. And I could go into all of the others. You can also read it. So I'm at an hour of recording, so I'm going to let you guys go. If you have any comments or thoughts or concerns, you can put them downstairs. Thank you. Have a good day.